Kelley Rourke,
Andy Wilkowske.
I have been talking about you on every single show. People have been hearing about you. They've been hearing your translations. Now people finally get to meet you. So thank you for being here today.
Always a pleasure.
um, so tell everyone where you're talking to us from today.
I am talking with you from Rosaboom, New York, which is near Cooperstown. And if you really want to know, it has 3 syllables. It's not Roseboom, it's Rosaboom. And it's a corruption. I've taught you a new thing. It's actually a corruption of Rosebaum, rose tree. And so if you take that into account, the old timers do pronounce it with 3 syllables.
Rosaboom.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Wow, I learned a new thing today.
All right.
So I've known you, tick that one off the box. I've known you for 15 years now. We met at Glimmerglass Opera. I was an apprentice, and but I don't know, how did you get into opera? Do you have a musical background? I mean, I know you have a musical background, but
yeah, so I actually my undergraduate degree was in piano performance.
Okay.
It was pretty clear early on that that was not going to be my thing. But I started off as a music ed major.
Okay.
And I was a fine pianist. But I started teaching piano, and I really enjoyed teaching piano, and that seemed much better than being in a classroom full of children, because alone you can relate to children as adults, whereas a group of them is kind of a monster, I think. I've totally gone off track. But anyway, musical background. I was jealous of all of my friends who were like full-on music majors, because they had like theory classes and more history classes than I did as a plain old BA. So I went full-on BM. Go ahead. I went.
I am not editing that out. Kelley Rourke went full on BM.
And switched to a performance degree, with the intention not of performing, but of teaching piano. And then I took an internship at Glimmerglass one summer. And it really kind of blew my mind, as someone who spent my undergraduate career basically by myself in a practice room, I don't know, 6 to 8 hours a day, like all the time practicing by myself, which was cool. I liked practicing, which was a good thing. But to be in a room full of people who had each spent a year or more thinking about putting on a show, whether it was the singers or the director or the conductor or the designers, everyone had come with so much preparation. And then they got in a room, and as it does when it's working well, they were able to hear new ideas and say, let me just put aside what I've thought about this piece or this character all this time and build a show together. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool kind of art making. And that really is what got me into opera, the collaborative spirit. And I think, had my first opera experience been somewhere else where you don't have that luxurious rehearsal period and that spirit of collaboration, I might never have gotten bit by the bug. I don't have that, oh, I heard blah, 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 Met broadcast, or I saw this production. For me, it was about being inside of that artistic experience.
That is really interesting. Now, so when was that, when you first were an intern at Glimmerglass?
That was 1994.
So 94, and you were an intern, and then can you just talk briefly about like how your role changed? Have you been at Glimmerglass because you're there, you're the dramaturg there now. Have you been there this entire time? How has your role changed from intern to mastermind?
My role, things just kept getting added on. I came as an intern actually running super titles. I applied for an internship like 1,000 other people, and they needed someone to run the titles. The qualification for that is being able to follow a score, and they saw, oh, piano major, she could probably follow a score. Cool. So I ran the titles, and at Glimmerglass, again, that long rehearsal period, the person who writes the titles is really watching all of the rehearsals and trying to craft a translation that represents the intentions of those artists that are making that show at that moment. And I thought, again, well, that's really cool. And I
So
kept
let me
doing
stop
that
you
on
right
the
there,
side.
because I think that this is something that people don't really realize, is the fact that the person who's writing the super titles isn't just doing it abstractly, but they're sitting in the rehearsal, taking in all this information just like the actors are, and they're crafting it from what's being done on stage. It's not just an exercise in like writing down the literal translation. It is an integral part of the show, part of the storytelling, right?
Yeah, I think in the best of all possible worlds, absolutely. I think of it not as a, you know, it's not like a literary translation that you're writing to be read. I'm writing something that's to be part of the theatrical experience.
Right.
And I think I've really done my job if you don't really even notice that you're reading titles, because I want to be concise enough that people can get the gist quickly. I want to use cognates when possible, so people just think they understand what's going on. Because ultimately what's going on up here over people's heads should not be the most interesting thing. I don't want your eyes here. I want your eyes here.
Right.
So if someone ever says to me, that was the most beautiful poetic line you wrote, I think, ugh, I have failed.
That is really interesting, because I honestly, I don't know that people realize the thought and the intention that goes behind the writing of those super titles. But continue on. So you started as an intern, and then you were writing titles, and
yeah, well, I started just running them, and I really, you know, kind of learned that craft by watching the person writing titles, you know, go back and forth. And sometimes they were in the room, and sometimes we used someone who was remote, but there was a lot of conversation that I was following. And then one year, the person who had the job of writing titles for one show, no, I will not say which show, just didn't come through. And these were in the days that titles weren't even computerized. These were in the days that they were on like 1,000 little glass mount slides that had to be ordered in advance. And like the titles had not come through. And the company's like, what to do? The person is not responding. And I said, you know, I think I know how to do this. And John Conklin, who was the associate artistic director, said, yeah, I mean, you definitely seem pretty smart. Also, we don't have another choice, and let's work on it together. And we worked on it together. I argued with him about some things, which I think really impressed him. And then they started hiring me to write titles. And then after that, you know, it was a couple more years, and John said it was really very much John who was my champion and my mentor. You know, one year he said, oh, you should write a program note for this thing. Yeah. You know, and for those who don't know John, I mean, he, in a lot of ways, I think, created American modern opera stage design. I mean, he's one of the great designers and one of the great dramaturgs of our time. People ask me where I studied dramaturgy, and I say, oh, I got to study with John Conklin, but I didn't have to pay NYU tuition. So it was a huge win.
Can
yeah,
you
and
tell
you know,
us, because I think like as a singer, I think I speak for, well, I don't know, maybe it's just my own ignorance, but even opera patrons might not know what a dramaturg does. Can you just talk a little bit about what does a dramaturg do?
Yeah, you know, we're not that common in the U.S., so it's not surprising that people don't necessarily know. I think of my job as a connector, and I am connecting both artists and audiences to the worlds of a piece. Those worlds include the world that starts at the downbeat and ends at the double bar, right? Like, what is contained in this story? But another world that I think everyone needs to consider is, what is the world in which the piece was produced? And then, as important, if not most important, what is the world in which we are producing this piece right now? What are the intersections of these worlds? What are the tensions between these worlds? And then if you want to get very, I don't know what the word is, something about it, what is the world that we're trying to create with this production? Because I think as storytellers, we are creating a world, and maybe what we're putting on the stage is something that makes people say, yes, this, I like things about this, and I want to make these things happen. And maybe the world that we're putting on stage is something that makes people say, oh, cautionary tale. But I'm coming into rehearsal having really studied all of those worlds and ready to offer information or ask questions that help people connect to the different worlds. Okay, so what does that look like in real life? Because that all sounds very kind of ethereal. So in real life, it means as I'm meeting with the creative team way before we get in the rehearsal room, as I start to learn about their plans, I'm reading books and I'm sending things and saying, hey, have you seen this? Did you read this? This is really interesting. And same thing when the singers get there. It usually means I'm writing titles. Because again, writing titles, you're trying to ride that line between the story that the original librettist wrote, but are there some different ways that we're tilting it in this production? It means writing program notes. At Glimmerglass, it means putting together a series of talks that help connect to the worlds of the piece. So it's a super fun job. I get to read books for a living and then share the most fun things that I found with amazing artists.
That sounds really cool. So you've run the titles, you've written the titles. I know you've written singing translations. You're a dramaturg, you're a librettist. All of these things, to me, it's just, you just said it, it's all basically storytelling, right? I mean, what it boils down to being a good storyteller, which you are one.
I mean,
and,
it's like your job.
Well, okay, but I take what's been written and I interpret it. But yeah, it's storytelling for sure. But you're more of a creator than an interpreter. I guess you do it all, is what I'm saying. You interpret, you create, you write, and I just regurgitate it. But what I'm wondering is, like, I mean, these jobs, all these different hats you wear, they must sort of influence each other in some way, or do they talk to each other? Is there one that stands out to you as what you identify as? Like, I'm a librettist, but I also am a dramaturg. How do those influence each other for you?
I mean, they have similar skill sets and similar processes. But what I'm producing is different. As a librettist, I'm putting the words in people's mouths. As the dramaturg, one of the things about that job is I don't have the same stakes as anyone else in the room, right? Like, I haven't written the words. I don't have to worry about how I'm going to navigate the tessitura on page 37. I'm not the director thinking like, I have a beautiful idea, but I'm going to end up with 9 hours total with the chorus. How am I going to achieve that? I'm not the costume designer worrying about the quick change. I can kind of sit on the side and say, oh, have you considered? And I think it's useful to have that person who, is removed from any one thing. So when I move into the role of the librettist, I can't have the same big picture as the dramaturg has.
Right.
So it's a little bit different. And it's fun for me to have that close up, high stakes, and to have them more kind of sitting on the sidelines. That's cool.
So you're the dramaturg at Glimmerglass, and I mean, we're all canceled right now. I know you've been working hard to try to figure out the summer festival. What's going on with their festival this year?
Yeah, well, I mean, the short answer is the festival is canceled. The shows that we've been working on for 2 years are not happening this summer. And, there is this desire, as on the part of all arts organizations, and there's so much amazing creative work happening right now, by the way, to say, okay, we're a bunch of creative people. We have invested a lot of thought into several shows. Is there something that we can provide for our audiences in this moment in an online format? And I'm certainly part of those conversations at Glimmerglass, partially because, wow, I've read a lot of books. And I am one of the people just throwing out ideas. And it's fascinating because the team at Glimmerglass, I'm so proud to be part of that team. It's like some highly, highly skilled individuals. And yet the thing that we have all trained to do, which is put on live opera in a theater, is not the thing we're being asked to do. So it's like, we all just got brand new jobs.
Yeah.
We don't actually have job descriptions or any job training, but it's a bunch of smart people who really want to do something. And so we're just learning every day, which sometimes feels exhilarating, like learning new stuff is cool.
Yeah.
And sometimes really exhausting. So we're just, we're kind of homing in at this point on some of the things that we want to do for our audiences later in the summer.
Cool. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that as you announce stuff. So I want to go back to what you kind of said earlier about sort of the collaborative spirit was one of the things that really inspired you to want to continue your work in opera. And I love that idea. I love when it actually happens. And I want to ask you about, just to talk a little bit more about collaborating with people, whether it's collaborating with singers. I know I've been asking everyone what's challenging about working with singers or what's rewarding about working with singers. But so either about that or maybe collaborating with directors or composers.
I mean, what's amazing about working with singers is the thing that they do that like gets you right here and makes your sternum vibrate. It never fails that, because I spend maybe a third of my time actually in the rehearsal room. A lot of my time is spent solo, just writing and studying and translating. And then to get in the room, even when it's just with piano and there's that first sing through and you're like up close with those voices.
Love it.
There's nothing like it, and it never gets old. Just like it never gets old when you finally get to the Sitzprobe anytime. I mean, does that ever get old?
Never.
That feeling of like suddenly, like
you the orchestra play the overture, and you're like, oh, this is happening.
Yeah.
So great.
Yeah. So I feel like I get that twice. Once is moving from just studying by myself into the room with singers, and then you add the orchestra, and your head explodes. It's like the first tomato of summer.
Oh, yes. That's a great way to put it. So I know one of the other ways that you collaborate is that you have been doing some mentoring with other librettists. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. That's been really interesting for me. Washington National Opera, where I'm also a dramaturg, has this program called American Opera Initiative. And they choose 3 composer librettist teams every year. Not necessarily teams that come together. They choose 3 librettists, 3 composers, put them together, and they commission each of them to write a 20-minute opera. The teams are chosen around the end of the calendar year, and then they, by about summer, have a piano vocal draft, and in the fall, they do a week-long workshop. And it's a real workshop. I mean, there's rewriting the whole time. They use the members of the K. Fritz Young Artist Program, and they're totally game to like keep learning new things. And then there's a premiere at the Kennedy Center in January. And the way they work this program is every year they choose 3 mentors: a composer, a librettist, and a conductor, to work with these teams and mentor them through the process. There are also 2 members of Washington National Opera staff who also serve as mentors in a way, Ken Weiss and Rob Ainsley. And that thing of being a mentor is really interesting, because it's not how would I solve this problem. It is, okay, there's a problem here. How do I flag something and support someone as they solve it their way? Because they're writing the piece. I'm not writing the piece.
Right.
And so it's interesting just figuring out how to navigate each one, because the first thing to do is listen and understand it's a new collaboration for composer and librettist as well. So they have to figure out how they're working together. And then how I, insert my way into the process that still lets it be their piece is actually quite a creative journey, you know, and I like to think that I am slightly different with each team, just like I like to think that I work slightly differently as a librettist with every composer. I think that's collaboration, not coming in and saying, well, this is how I do it.
Right. Kind of like the stereotypical singer who's like, well, this is the way I sing Sempre Libera, whatever. This
Right.
is how I do Traviata. Well, like, okay, well, that might have been appropriate for that one production, but can we at least talk about how this production's going to be different? Or, I mean, that's really sort of at the heart of what this collaboration that you're talking about is, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's an exercise in observation and awareness and listening and communication, figuring out how I can be useful. It's not about being right or wrong, because the thing is, you could be, and this goes for any collaboration, you could be very right, and express that in a way that just shuts down the artistic process.
right.
You know, so it's about knowing what you have to contribute, but also knowing how to make that heard and received in a way that keeps things moving forward.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Those guys are lucky to have you there. I've seen some of this stuff.
I learned from them. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I've seen some of the operatic initiative works. I've seen some of the showcase stuff that they've done, and it's all been really, really impressive. And I've worked with Rob too at Minnesota Opera, and he's terrific.
He's great.
Yeah. So you're mentoring these librettists now. You're a librettist. First of all, how do you become a librettist? Did it just was it a natural evolution of writing titles and writing singing translations? And then, you know, we're sort of in this golden age right now of all these great new American operas being written. And, you know, sort of like what I was saying with dramaturgy, like I think singers don't always necessarily understand the craft behind writing a libretto, because you can't have a good opera if you don't have a good libretto. So what would you wish that singers knew about the process of writing a libretto? Singers or anyone, and opera patrons.
Yeah. I mean, you know, for me, I think my job is telling a story that's hopefully really compelling in a way that invites and makes room for music. You know, there are so many good stories in the world that aren't necessarily a great fit for opera. And I think, you know, when I'm talking with my collaborators about, you know, what's the next opera, for me, one of the first questions is why does this story that we love want to be an opera? Like, how is music part of the storytelling, and why does this make sense as something sung? So that's my first question, which I don't think answered your question at all.
So that's okay. That's good. I mean, because a lot of times it's like, what's the point of doing this as an opera is a great question to ask, because they're not all great. They're not all great subjects. And, you know, I've been involved in some, and I've seen some where I've thought like, well, why did they make this an opera, you know?
I do want to go back to your question though, and I'll take a breath. So if you want to cut here. Okay. What do I wish that singers or anyone knew about librettists?
Yeah.
I wish I wish they knew that we made the piece. You know, all the time still you will hear about John Adams' Nixon in China and Mozart's Figaro, and even, I mean, it's amazing, you'll read reviews that talk about the story and ascribe it to the composer. And so I wish that people would understand that someone is writing the story and the structure that allows the music to do what it does. And I can't tell you how often our names just aren't listed.
Right. That's maddening. It has to be just maddening, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big lesson was learned for me when I did Silent Night and this, and I don't think either Mark or Kevin would be upset with me sort of retelling this story, but Mark Campbell talked about how he wrote the libretto, and when Kevin said that when he got the libretto, it was just everything was there for him, because usually when he's writing symphony, he comes up with the structure and the story, and he has this story in his head that he's trying to tell. But when Mark gave him the libretto, it was like, oh, someone did all that for me, and I just have to write the music that goes along with this story. And it might have been, if not the first time, the first time that it really hit me, like, oh, that's the symphonic structure of this opera, is the story, and the libretto, that's the, the form that they're working with. And it's that's really important that people understand that.
Yeah, there was one time I was staying at an Airbnb, and normally Airbnb folks stay out of your way, but once in a while you get talky ones with questions, and you try to be friendly and polite. And so one of them is asking about this whole business of being a librettist, and I try to explain, and they're like, that's like opera, that's like the symphony. I'm like, yeah, I mean, pretty much, but like it's a play. And I'm describing, and he says, oh, so you're like a songwriter? And I said, well, kind of, and I started talking about that idea of, yes, I'm writing lyrics, but I'm also structuring this whole story and how the story is told, and making room for an aria here and an ensemble here. And finally he said, oh, so I mean, basically you're an engineer. And I thought, yeah, kind of.
Story engineer.
Yeah, because the other thing that you're taking into account besides making room for music is probably the producing company has said you get this many singers,
right,
and the piece needs to be this long, so you understand all of these constraints, and then you write the story for these constraints, and of course making room for the music to bloom. So yeah, I'm an engineer and a songwriter.
I love it. Kelley Rourke, story engineer.
Yeah.
That is so great. I love talking about this sort of like nitty gritty behind the scenes stuff that people don't necessarily think about or know about. I just find it fascinating, and I could talk with you all day about it, but Zoom is going to kick me off here in a couple of minutes. So I want to go to the Fauci 5, my sort of quick little questionnaire to kind of check in with our quarantine situation. So here we go. Fauci 5. Do you have a favorite opera?
Well, Poppaea was the first opera that I really worked on at Glimmerglass that I fell in love with. I mean, it was a dream team in terms of cast, director, designer, everything. And it's a great opera, and it will always be special to me. But also whatever opera I'm working on tends to be my favorite.
You got to fall in love with the thing that you're working on. Totally. I totally agree with that.
You did.
Do you have like maybe a favorite book or some sort of resource about opera that you could recommend to us?
I don't know if I have a favorite resource that's about opera, but I have a favorite resource for opera. How's that?
Yeah.
Which is, there's this amazing book called The Timetables of History. And it's like phone book sized. Do you have one? It's a phone book sized kind of timeline. And down one side are years, and then across the top, oh my God, visual aid. And then across the top, it's like daily life, political life, art, everything that's going on. So it's a real shortcut to understanding the world of a piece, and you go 5 years in either direction. Pick a year and read us a year, Andy.
Oh, geez. All right. All right. We're going to go, I don't know, 18. Oh, no.
I love this book.
I don't know. I'm like 1776. No, wait. Okay. 1726. History and Politics. Cardinal André Fleury, Chief Minister in France. Literature and Theater. Daniel Defoe's The Four Voyages of Captain George Roberts. Religion. St. John of the Cross, canonized. Visual Arts. Colin Campbell's Compton Place. Music. Handel becomes a British subject. Science and Technology. Stephen Hales measures blood pressure for the first time. daily life, first circulating library established in Edinburgh.
So like, bang, there you are, right in that world, right?
Drops you right in there.
Yep.
That's so great.
So I love it. It's also a great shortcut. Like if I have to write a program note and I'm stuck, I can often like find a little nugget and like spin from there. Now you know my secret.
I love it. I love it. Any good book that you've read recently that you can recommend?
I recently read a book called In Love with the World. I can't remember the name of the writer, but he's a Tibetan monk and was like very high up. He was the abbot of his monastery, and the book starts with him sneaking out at night because he wants to go on this 4-year wandering retreat. So this is someone who's been like very high up, like very much served and taken care of, and he wants to leave it all behind and see what he's learned from his practice, if he can just like survive out in the world stripped of everything. It doesn't quite, of course he is surprised immediately. I won't give anything away, but I will say that the book is both, he talks about observing himself in these situations, and the book is both kind of a primer on Buddhist thought and practice and kind of a great adventure story.
Awesome. What's it called again?
In Love with the World.
In Love with the World. Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
And so what are you doing, since we're all canceled right now, what are you doing to stay sane or to stay creative?
When I'm not Zooming, which is definitely not sane or creative,
No.
I'm actually practicing piano a lot more these days, which I haven't had the luxury of doing for a really long time. So getting my fingers back in shape, a little bit of Mozart, a little bit of Glass, a little bit of Bartok. So that's fun.
So the next time we do a concert together, maybe you'll play piano and I'll play guitar?
Sure. Yeah, sure.
Next time we have a hootenanny?
Or I'll play auto harp.
Yeah.
Auto harp.
So, and I know you're not a big TV watcher. I usually my final question is usually like, what are you streaming on Netflix? But you're not, I don't think you're a big Netflix person. So maybe you just want to...
I didn't have internet at this house until we went into quarantine here. I loved having a house free of internet in the country, but obviously that did not make sense. So yeah, still no Netflix.
You could, instead of talking about that, maybe you could just talk about, or give a shout out to some place in Cooperstown, a restaurant or a business or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not going out to restaurants very much these days. I am looking forward to being able to go back to Stagecoach Coffee, which is this amazing place in downtown Cooperstown. And I do go there and get their beans. They are open for carry out, and they roast their own beans right there in the store. It is amazing coffee. So although I can't sit on their beautiful terrace and enjoy coffee that they have made, I am grinding my Stagecoach beans every morning and enjoying a cup of their coffee.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for being a part of my life. I love you. I'm so happy we became friends and that we've gotten to work on all these projects together. And yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there are so many great things in my life that have come out of Glimmerglass, and you were like way up there. So it's so fun to get to hear you sing my words, especially because your diction is so amazing. I hear them all.
Awesome. Even over the internet.
Even over the internet. It's really great, and it's great to see your face, and it's been fun talking with you right now. I mean, I guess we're talking.
We're talking.
I guess it's a conversation. It's just a little two-dimensional.
Totally. All right.
All right. Love you.
Love you too.